Hi, today in this section, I will introduce the unit circle and find the 6 common trigonometric functions. So today we're going to go over the unit circle, and as you can see, this is a typical unit circle. I will give you a download where you can print the unit circle. So you can either copy this or print out the PDF. So yeah, so this is what a typical unit circle is. Notice it has a degree, 30 degrees, and it also has a radians. And then it has a coordinate, right? So for the 30 degrees or pi over 6, you have a coordinate. You actually have what's called an x value. This is your x value, which is radical 3 over 2. And the y value is 1/2. And I will go over how they got that 30 degrees, radical 3 over 2. Okay, so yes, so and then I'll go over the 6 trigonometric functions. So here is a typical unit circle. As you can see, you have this whole unit circle is 360, goes from 0 to 360, and you can either be in radians or degrees. So like the first one is 30 degrees or pi over 6, and this has a coordinate of radical 3 over 2, comma 1/2. So you really have to only learn this first quadrant one, because as you can see, the rest are the same, but the only difference is that in quadrant two, the cosine is negative, and quadrant 3, the cosine and the y sine values are negative, right? So notice this is negative radical 3 over 2, and then this is negative 1/2. And in quadrant 4, what is negative? The sine value, the y value is negative, right? The cosine is positive and the sine value are negative. So let me just go over the first 30, 45, 60, and the 90 coordinates, because once you know this, you can easily remember the other stuff. So 30 degrees. You have 30 degrees are pi over 6. So remember in the previous video, you can easily translate 30 degrees into pi over 6 from the previous video. So yeah, so for 30 degrees, you have what's called an x value and a y value. So these are your coordinates. So radical 3 over 2, comma 1/2, right? So that's the cosine. So if they ever ask you for the cosine of 30 degrees, you can say, oh, based on unit circle is radical 3 over 2. Okay. And if they ever ask you for the sine, I'm only going to go over the, for right now, there's like 6 different trigonometric functions, but for right now, I'm going to do the cosine and sine, the sine of 30 degrees. So if they ever ask you for the sine of 30 degrees, you can say based on your unit circle is positive 1/2. Okay. So yeah, so 30 or pi over 6 has a coordinate of an x value of radical 3 over 2 and a y value 1/2. About 45. So 45 or pi over 4 has an x value of radical 2 over 2 and a y value of radical 2 over 2. They're pretty much the same. So this is probably the easiest one to remember because it's radical 2 over 2 and then sine of radical 2 over 2. And then this one is pretty much the 60 degree or pi over 3. And has an x value of 1/2 and a sine value of radical 3 over 2. Notice that it's almost exactly like the same of 30 degrees, but it's flipped, right? It's reversed, like the x value is 1/2 and the y value is radical 3 over 2. So these are pretty much what you have to really remember. You have to remember that pi over 6 or 30 degrees has a coordinate of radical 3 over 2 and has a y value of 1/2. And 45 degrees, or pi over 4, has a cosine of radical 2 over 2 and sine of radical 2 over 2. And then 60 degrees, or pi over 3, has a x value of 1/2 and a radical, and has a y value radical 3 over 2. And then you have pi over 2, or 90, has a coordinate of x value of 0 and a sine value of 1, right? And then you have 0, that's where I should have started at, 0 or 2 pi, has an x value of 1 and a y value of 0. Okay, so these are the one, two, three, four. These are the 5 main ones you want to really memorize, because the rest is pretty much the same. So let's look at 2 pi over 3, or 120 degrees. And notice it's the same. It comes with a family of pi over 3. So their x values and the sine values are the same, but the only difference is the x value is negative. What about 3 pi over 4, or 135 degrees? It goes with the family of pi over 4. So it has a coordinate of negative radical 2 over 2 and positive sine value radical 2 over 2, right? And then the 5 pi over 6, or 150, notice that they both have a denominator of 6. So they both come from this family. It has a coordinate of negative radical 3 over 2, comma 1/2. Okay. And pi has a coordinate of negative 1 and y value of 0. Okay. So what about 7 pi over 6, or 210 degrees? Notice it comes from, as a denominator 6, so it comes from the family pi over 6. So it's pretty much the same thing, but the only difference is you have an x, the x and the y value are both negative. That's pretty much the same, the only difference. And yeah. And then what about 5 pi over 4? It has a denominator of 4, right? In radians, it has a denominator 4. So it comes from the family pi over 4, or 45 degrees. It's pretty much the same thing. The only difference is the x and y are negative. And 4 pi over 3, it comes from, has a denominator 3, so it comes from the family pi over 3, or 60 degrees. So it's pretty much the same thing as this, but the x and y values are negative. Okay, what about 3 pi over half, 3 pi half, or 270 degrees? It comes from the pi half family. So the only difference is the y value is negative, right? We have a negative 1 and an x value of 0. Okay, what about 5 pi over 4? Notice it has a denominator 3, so it comes from the family pi over 3. But the only difference is the sign is negative because we are in quadrant 4, right? So it has an x value 1/2 and its y value, or a sign, that when they say, so x is the same thing as cosine, and then y is the same thing as sine. I will go over this. I will go over the 6 trigonometric function. Okay, and then 7 pi, or 315 degrees, it comes from the family pi over 4. So it has a coordinate of radical 2 over 2, comma, and then the sine value, or the y value, is negative radical 2 over 2, and then 330 degrees has a coordinate, comes from the family, has a denominator 6, so it comes from the family pi over 6, so it's radical 3 over 2, comma, negative 1/2. Okay, so that's pretty much, you have to somehow memorize this whole thing, because yeah, but remember, you just have to remember this stuff, and then I think, now don't know how to teach you how to like 5 pi over 6. There's no trick of memorizing that pi over 6 and 5 pi over 6. You just have to memorize this, but yeah. So but remember, look at the denominator. If you know that if this has a denominator 6, it knows it comes from the family pi over 6, and then you have to figure out, okay, so 5 pi over 6 is 150 degrees, so you know that's in quadrant 2, so you know that the cosine is negative, right? So you just have to remember where you are, so in the unit circle. So if you're in quadrant 1, the cosine and sine is positive. If you're in quadrant 2, the cosine or the x value is negative and the y value is positive. Or in quadrant 3, both the cosine and sine or the x and y value are negative. And in quadrant 4, the sine or the y value is only negative. Okay, so that's the unit circle. Okay, so let's talk about the 6 common trigonometric functions. So the first one is sine of x. Now, usually I only put this x can mean anything. It could be, it's just your angle, your unknown angles. So it could be alpha, beta, gamma, just all those Greek letters. But I just use x because it was easy to remember. So sine of x is also y over radius. So that's why if you were looking in your unit circle, like like 30 degrees, right? It had 30 degrees had a coordinate of radical 3 over 2 comma 1/2. So remember remember how I said sine is also the y value of your coordinate of the coordinate of your unit circle. So notice that y is a fraction. So remember how they say that sine is y over radius. So this 1 is your y value, and then this 2 under the bottom is your radius. So that's why you have a sine value of 1/2 of 30 degrees, right? Sine of 30 degrees has a value of 1/2 because it's technically y over radius. The same thing with cosine of 30. It's x over radius, so that's why in the numerator you have an x value of radical 3, and then your radius is 2. Okay, or so there's also where I say opposite over hypotenuse. Later on, you're going to learn that you could find sine and cosine using this the SOHCAHTOA thing, right? So that's how you could. That's another way of finding sine, cosine, and tangent is doing the SOHCAHTOA. So sine is also opposite over hypotenuse, right? Cosine is the same thing as adjacent over hypotenuse. And then tangent is opposite over adjacent. So you will, I think when you try to figure out later on, you're going to learn how to find your unknown triangle or unknown side. And usually you're going to use the SOHCAHTOA things, but you can also use this. Sine is y over radius or opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is x over radius or adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is y over x or opposite over adjacent. And I will go over, I'll do one example where I'll find all the 6 trigonometric functions. Cosecant is the same thing as 1 over sine of x, right? So once you find your sine of x, you just put 1 over sine of x. Secant is the same thing as 1 over cosine of x, and cotangent is the same thing as x over y or cosine over sine, right? Because remember, cosine is the same thing as x, and sine is the same thing as y. Okay, so let me do an example. Okay, so example 1 says find all 6 trigonometric functions for 30 degrees or pi over 6. So this is where you kind of need to know where you're at the unit circle. So you need to figure out where you are in the unit circle. So 30 degrees is in quadrant 1, right? Here's 30 degrees. It's also pi over 6. And remember, in the unit circle, you have a coordinate of radical 3 over 2 and a y value of 1/2. So you already found your two of them. You already found your sine and cosine. So they say find all 6. So the first one we could find easily is so cosine of 30 degrees. So if they ever ask you for cosine 30 degrees, it's pretty much x over radius. So that's why this is radical 3 over 2. Okay, so yes. Okay, let's do the second one, the sine. Sine of 30 degrees is also y over radius, or just pretty much the y value of the coordinate of this. So it's 1/2. Okay. Now, what about what else do we know? What about sorry, I'm out. Secant. I'm not doing this in order. I'm just secant of 30 degrees. So if they ask you for secant 30 degrees, what is secant is? It's 1 over cosine of 30 degrees, right? Remember, it's cos, so it's going to be 1 over, and what is the cosine of 30 degrees? Is a radical 3 over 2, right? So this can be simplified. You have a compound fraction, so it's 1 over radical 3. You can rewrite this as 1 divided by radical 3 over 2, and then you change this divide sign to a multiplication. So you're going to flip it. It'd be 2 radical 3. So that would be 2 radical 3. Now, in trig, you really want to get rid of you don't want to have a square root in the denominator. So what you're going to do is called rationalize the denominator. So you have 2 radical 3. So to get rid of this radical 3, you're going to rationalize, you're going to multiply top and bottom by radical 3. So that's 2 radical 3 over 3. Okay, so that is your answer for the secant of 30 degrees. So let's find some more. So what did we found secant? Let's do cosecant of 30 degrees. So that's equivalent to saying 1 over sine of 30 degrees. So that's going to be 1 over, what is the sine of 30 degrees? It's sine of 30 degrees, we said is 1/2. So it's 1 over 1/2. So you could do it like this. I don't like doing that way. I like doing the brackets. So I'm going to do the bracket because it's faster. So over here we have a denominator 1, and over here we have a denominator 2. So my common denominator is 2. So I'm going to multiply it both this 2 by both sides. So that'd be 2, and then 2 times 1/2 is 1. So it's 2. If you didn't want to do the bracket, you could do it this way, right? You could do 1 divided by 1/2, and then change this divide to a multiplication, and then flip it. As you can see, you would get 2 over 1. Okay, so let me circle my answer. So cosine of 30 is 2. Secant of 30 is 2 radical 3 over 3. Sine of 30 is 1/2. Cosine of 30 is radical 3 over 2. And then what else? We got to do 2 more. So let's find secant, cosecant. What about cotangent? Cotangent is, remember, the same thing. It's pretty much the reverse. Oh, I didn't even find tangent yet. So let's find that first. Let's do tangent of 30 degrees. So remember, tangent is the same thing as y over x. or sine over cosine. So what's our y value for 30 degrees? It has a y value of 1/2, so put that 1/2 divided by what's our x value of 30 degrees? It's radical 3 over 2. So I'm going to solve this by doing the bracket way. So over here we have a denominator 2. Over here we have a denominator 2, so my common denominator is 2. So that would be 2 times 1/2 is just 1. And then 2 times radical 3 over 2, that's radical 3. So multiply top and bottom by radical 3. So you get radical 3 over 3. Okay. So that is tangent of 30. Let's find cotangent of 30. So that's like the last one we had to find. So cotangent is just the reciprocal of tan. So cotangent is x over y. So all you got to do is just flip this. So that's going to be 3 over radical 3. And remember, you can't have a square root, a radical in the bottom. So you want to rationalize the denominator. So you're going to multiply top and bottom by square root of radical 3. So this is going to be 3 times radical 3. That's 3 radical 3. And then radical 3 times radical 3, it's just 3. And as you can see, the 3's disappears. So you're going to do your final answer is square root of 3. Okay. So that's how you find the 6 trigonometric functions of for 30 degrees. Now you can do this for any degrees, right? You could do 3 pi over 4, right? And you just have to know where you are in the unit circle. So 3 pi over 4 has a coordinate of negative radical 2 over 2, comma radical 2 over 2. And then just find the 6 trigonometric functions. So find the cosine, which is negative radical 2 over 2. And then the sine is radical 2 over 2, right? Because remember, cosine is the same thing as x. And then the sine is the same thing as y. And then you can find the secant, you can find the cosecant, you can find the tangent and the cotangent of 3 pi over 4. So yeah, that's how you find all 6 trigonometric functions for 30 degrees. Okay, so I hope this video was helpful. And yeah,